The bomb's quiet ingredient. To understand the leash on that, Captain, you have to walk into a room that hummed before dawn and smelled like caustic and metal. Oak Ridge, mid-Cold War. The problem on the chalkboard was simple to write and brutal to solve. Separate lithium-7 from lithium-6 at industrial scale. Physics said their chemistry would be nearly identical. Policy said failure wasn't an option. Get this, they didn't use centrifuges. They used mercury. COLEX, the mercury-based chemical exchange process, moved lithium back and forth between an organic phase and an aqueous phase, exploiting a tiny isotope preference that only shows up after thousands of shuttles. Two columns stood like steel organ pipes. In one, lithium amalgam formed with mercury. In the other, caustic liquor stripped it back. The cascade sang when it was tuned. When it wasn't, it spat scale, foam, and lies. Meanwhile, down at Savannah River, a parallel craft took shape. Caustic soda exchange variants, tweaks to phase contactors, and the kind of operator law you never find in manuals. A chemist would run his thumb across a sight glass, feel the film, and know the mercury carryover was starting. He'd kill the flow, crack a valve, and watch a silver thread worm its way along the floor like a living thing. You kept a bucket ready, and your boots tied tight. Stakes weren't abstract. Weapons designers needed tritium for the stockpile, but they needed control more than volume. Lithium-6 was the tritium workhorse when irradiated in reactors. Lithium-7 was the safety margin, the isotope that didn't soak up neutrons and didn't throw tritium where you didn't want it. In that world, contamination cut both ways. Too much Li-6 in the wrong stream, and a reactor's neutron economy sagged. Too much Li-7 in a target, and tritium yield fell. The cascades had to split the atom's twins with a razor, day after day. Here's where the irony seeds itself. Those plants were built for bomb physics, but their side stream, the high-purity Li-7, became valuable to a peacetime machine no one had fully designed yet. Fleets of pressurized water reactors. The Navy learned quickly. If you make lithium hydroxide from Li-7, you get your pH control without feeding neutrons to Li-6. The purity bars written for weapons crept onto coolant spec sheets. A standard born in fear became routine. Inside the plants, routine meant improvisation. An operator joked the best tool in the building was a flattened spoon. Mercury would plate onto a gasket. Someone would pry it off and drop it into a jar labeled, in thick marker, savings. Night shifts turned into a choreography of wiping films, swapping resin beds, and tapping manometers that stuck at the worst possible moment. One Savannah River chemist, a man with coffee-black hands, spent so many weekends scraping carbonate scale off a pilot cell that he named the scraper Sunday. He'd tell apprentices, if your instrument starts to lie, it's never the instrument. It's always the chemistry. What nobody said out loud, but everybody felt, was the cost. Mercury left fingerprints everywhere, vapor in the rafters, beads in sumps, slicks in places managers swore were sealed. You didn't just run COLEX, you married it. And when the marriage soured, the cleanup took years. Oak Ridge learned that the hard way. The columns came down, but the liability didn't. Restart would become a dirty word long before Congress ever heard lithium-7 shortage. Meanwhile, the knowledge sat in notebooks that smelled like solvent. How you rate matched the organic and aqueous flows to keep the interface docile. How a 2-degree change in a contactor bay could flip the isotope preference and kill your cut. Which supplier's ion exchange resin shed fewer fines under caustic. None of it looked like national security on paper. All of it was. Then the wind shifted. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the weapons drawdown trimmed budgets. The tritium mission changed. Planners asked why scarce dollars were tied up in old mercury columns when newer methods might do. COLEX felt like a relic with a legal tail. The calls were made, valves were chained. The guild, because that's what it was, retired by attrition. A man who could hear a cascade go out of tune by the pitch of a pump took his hearing home. Here's the twist hidden in plain sight. The Navy didn't turn off with the columns. Submarine reactors still needed Li-7-based LiOH with purity that left no neutron money on the table. But the only people who knew how to hit those numbers at scale were walking out the gate. Commercial chemistry would step in with pooled production and broader specs, sure. Yet the habit of the Cold War, Treat Li-7 like oxygen, always there, stuck around. What nobody knew at the time was how that habit would calcify into doctrine. Procurement officers would assume lithium meant lithium that behaves in a neutron field the way we expect. Utilities would assume their civil supply covered the margin. And somewhere in a filing cabinet, a memo would redefine stewardship of an isotope as nobody's job. Years later, a bland GAO title would call it out. But in these rooms, during these nights, the die was cast. Purity wasn't a number. It was a craft, welded to places, and people the fleet would one day wish it hadn't let go. The Vanishing plant switch off. When the cascades went quiet, it didn't happen with a speech. It happened with clipboards. A budget line narrowed, a maintenance deferral stretched, a pump that had screamed for years finally didn't get its bearing. The late 80s into the 90s were a season of tidy language, drawdown, consolidation, mission change. Inside Oak Ridge, the unspoken word was simpler: stop. COLEX had always carried two ledgers, tons of isotope on one side, pounds of mercury on the other. The day the lawyers started reading process flow diagrams like charge sheets, everyone knew which ledger would win. Inspectors in white suits staged photos near sumps. A manager pointed to a sheen and called it legacy. Legacy turned into liability. Liability turned into policy: do not restart. The columns that once sounded like a pipe organ at peak shift were cut, craned, and pallet-trapped, as if someone might be tempted to bolt them back in the night. The know-how left faster than the hardware. The men and women who could read a contactor by the way the foam curled at a sight glass watched the keys change hands to decommissioning crews who measured success in locked gates, not clean cuts. A senior operator joked darkly that the only cascade left on site was the chain of signatures required to move a drum from one building to another. He signed his last work order and took the pen with him. Cost cutters didn't need to be villains. They just needed a spreadsheet. On paper, lithium was lithium. Battery markets and grease thickeners didn't care which isotope carried the charge. Civil reactors, hungry but forgiving, widened specs and learned to manage dose with other levers. Boron chemistry tweaks, filtration, fuel management. The narrow weapons-era purity that had sheltered naval reactors looked, to a generalist's eye, like overkill. The line item, Li-7 enrichment, got a footnote, non-core. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge bled time into cleanup. Mercury was patient. It lingered in seams, hid in pit bottoms, showed up where seals were sure. Each new detection fed new caution. The political story wrote itself. This is what the old way costs. The new way, if it existed, wasn't in anyone's portfolio. By the time talk of alternatives surfaced, membrane exchanges, crown ether dreams, the people who'd shepherded the last good drums out the gate were planting tomatoes. Across the Pacific, the silence wasn't universal. One country kept building columns. They didn't publish brochures. They didn't need to. If you wanted high-purity Li-7 at scale, you learned a new time zone and a new kind of patience. Contracts got longer. Questions about process details went unanswered. Shipments arrived with certificates that were complete enough to pay on and vague enough to worry over. A procurement officer would hold a sheet that said lithium content, 99.99%, and realize it could mean anything and nothing about Li-7. Stockpiles smoothed the edges for a while. Programs had stashed drums the way pilots stash fuel, because you never know. But drums age, packaging breathes, moisture does what moisture always does. Every annual inventory turned into a small confession. The pool is shrinking. Buyers signed long-term deals to cover the gap, blind to the day a naval ramp would surge at the same moment a civil restock hit. The market didn't see submarines, it saw tonnage. And then, in 2013, a careful, bureaucratic voice said the quiet part aloud. The Government Accountability Office wrote that no federal entity had taken stewardship responsibility for lithium-7, that the United States had no domestic enrichment, and that the country leaned on foreign supply with limited visibility. The prose was mild. The implication was, if your coolant chemistry depends on a number nobody in your own system owns, your schedule belongs to someone else. Inside materials labs and QA rooms, the switch-off showed up as temporary deviations. A shore lab couldn't clear a batch before a sale date because the mass spec queue was full of commercial work. Someone checked a box, used blend plan B, monitor tritium rates weekly, and promised to true up next cycle. Next cycle turned into the one after that. Blending worked until it didn't, and when it didn't, the neutron penalty didn't announce itself with a bang. It arrived as a slow theft of margin across months. What made the shutdown era dangerous wasn't a single bad actor. It was a stack of reasonable choices. Decommission a mercury-heavy process that scares regulators. Buy commodity lithium because the market's moving that way. Trust certificates that speak the language of chemistry, but not the dialect of isotope. Accept a delay because assay equipment falls under export controls you didn't write. None of it illegal, all of it cumulative. By the time a young engineer asked why the pH control budget counted grams the way a diver counts breaths, the answer traced back to a locked building and a retired guild. The Navy's need hadn't ended when the columns did. It had just gone quiet until the alarms. The single point of failure era. While Oak Ridge was tearing out columns, another skyline of stainless steel was going up an ocean away. No ribbon cuttings, no glossy photos, just capacity, quiet, growing, and increasingly alone at the top of the purity ladder. If you needed submarine-grade LI-7, you learned the names of 2 or 3 facilities in one region, and you hoped their calendars matched your patrol cycles. Hope is not a plan. It became the plan anyway. Here's where the market played its trick. In the 2000s, lithium meant batteries. Everyone talked about tonnage and carbonate versus hydroxide, not isotopes. Commodity charts rose like ski slopes. That heat threw a pleasant fog over a simple fact. The grams that matter to reactors aren't the grams that fill cathodes. Buyers walked into negotiations with price curves and delivery windows, then discovered a sentence that ate the meeting. What's your LI-7 assay? The answer arrived as a smile and a certificate. Lithium content 99.99%, which, again, could mean everything or nothing you needed. A procurement officer for a naval depot, let's call him Harris, kept a folder labeled questions nobody likes. At the top, who actually runs the isotope cut on this batch? The trader on the phone would say, our partners. Harris would ask for the partners processed. Silence stretched. Then, we meet purity. He'd run his finger along the spec sheet, down to the line that mattered. Li-7 greater or equal to 99.9%. And know the only way to find out was to wait for a lab slot back home. Ships don't sail on we'll see. Meanwhile, GAO's 2013 report sat on desks like a smoke alarm you couldn't unplug. It said the quiet parts. The US had 0 domestic Li-7 production, no federal steward, and limited visibility into foreign supply. It didn't name the plants abroad or accuse anyone of bad faith. It didn't have to. Dependence is dependence whether the partner smiles or frowns. Planners clipped the executive summary and slid it into briefings. It changed little. The single point of failure stayed single. Consolidation made the slope steeper. 2 mid-sized producers merged. A third pivoted to battery-grade volumes with wider isotope tolerances because that's where the margins lived. Isotope separation is expensive to run and finicky to certify. If your biggest customers don't pay for nearly pure Li-7, why carry the burden? Civil utilities could adjust to drift with boron and fuel management. The silent service couldn't. But the silent service also didn't publish spot bids with theater-level urgency. It bought in the shadows and prayed the shadows would deliver. Shipments started landing with a pattern Harris could feel before he could prove. Lots that met every chemical spec except the one the neutron field cares about. Certificates used ranges, not absolutes. Say typical, 99, 599, 9%. Typical is a comfort word until it is. He'd phone the Shore lab to jump the queue. The lab chief would sigh. The TIMS was tied up on a commercial contract with penalties. He could slide Harris in at 20 tomorrow. If the pallets cleared, customs tonight. And customs had questions. Harmonized codes for lithium compounds didn't care about isotopes either. A freight forwarder would pick the tariff class that shaved days, not the one that preserved traceability. A drum that started its life as high-purity Li-7 hydroxide, nuclear grade, might arrive as lithium hydroxide monohydrate, tech. You could fix paperwork. You couldn't fix the neutron penalty inside a miscut lot. On boats, engineers started seeing chemistry that didn't read like the last decade. pH nudged right on plan, but dose monitors told a different story. Tritium readings drifted higher than the model predicted for the burnup. Not a spike, no alarm to hang a memo on, just a creep that ate margin. An XO wrote in his night orders, "Adjust Lee early, watch the trend." Adjusting early became routine. Routine became assumption. Assumption became risk. Battery boom masked the shortage in an almost elegant way. Corporate decks bragged about new lithium sources coming online, brine pools, hard rock, DLE miracles. Anchors on finance shows said lithium glut, with a question mark shaped like a smirk. In that noise, a sentence tried to raise its hand. Not all lithium is the lithium you need. The sentence never made air. Inside program offices, it did. Harris put it on the first slide. He still signed for blends when the lab was late. Remediation sounded smart in rooms far from seawater. Take a borderline lot, blend it with something purer, land just over the line. On paper, math wins. In reality, every blend steals certainty. Each intermediate drum becomes a new entity with a history you can't fully audit. The Navy's 1 gram margin, shorthand for the sliver of isotopic slack submerged reactors can tolerate, shrinks in practice because you've turned one unknown into 3. Information asymmetry finished the trap. The region holding most high purity capacity knew who depended on them and when. They didn't need to flex. A missed quarters maintenance at a key column rippled into doubled lead times on another continent. Prices didn't explode. They oozed up just enough to make alternatives look rational. Alternatives took years. Patrols took weeks. Harris added a line to questions nobody likes. What happens if a single maintenance outage abroad overlaps a refit here? The answer lived in schedules, not statements. Quiet derates, adjusted patrol boxes, a memo about readiness phrased as routine maintenance. A captain at sea feeling the leash and choosing to surface, because a gram on a sheet isn't a gram in the core until the assay says so. Single point of failure isn't just a diagram. It's a feeling that starts in procurement and ends on the con. Inside the with alarms you can't argue saves reactors. Open the watertight door and it's hot, close and humming. Primary loop on the board, boron numbers scribbled in grease pencil, and a small white card with 2 figures circled, 7.2 and 7.4. Those aren't decorations. That's the pH window, corrected to what 300 degrees Celsius does to water's chemistry. Live inside it, and the metals keep their temper. Drift outside, and the plant starts writing IOUs you'll pay in dose, cracks, and downtime. Li-7 is the quiet hand on that dial. You dissolve it as lithium hydroxide, and it buffers the coolant against the acids born when radiolyses chews on water and when corrosion throws its tantrums. At room temperature, neutral is pH 7. At reactor temperature, neutral slides lower, and the right 7 on a handheld meter isn't the right 7 in the core. That's why the card S there. It's memory, not math. Now the part the periodic table doesn't warn you about. Natural lithium brings 2 characters to the party. Li-7, which barely notices neutrons, and Li-6, which loves them. When Li-6 grabs a neutron, it splits. Alpha particle here, tritium there. You don't feel that reaction like a kick. You feel it as a slow, relentless drift. Tritium builds where you'd rather it didn't. Helium finds its way into microstructures and pushes on grain boundaries. And the neutron that could have done useful work goes missing. Parasitic absorption is a polite phrase for a real cost. In a submarine reactor, margin lives in small places. Boron already soaks up neutrons to shape reactivity across the cycle. Fuel sees a planned burn-up curve. Control rods dance their careful dance. None of that expects a creeping thief in the coolant. So the spec pushes Li-7 purity hard. Think 99.9% and up, so that every gram you add to hold pH doesn't rent space to Li-6 habits. Miss that, even by the paperclip's worth, that crews joke about, and you're paying interest on debt you didn't mean to take. Watch how it shows up. The EOOW calls for a small LIOH addition after a power change, routine. You watch the calculated pH track slide back into the box. Good. But an hour later, the tritium monitor ticks a little higher than your mental model says it should. Not an alarm, not yet. Just enough to earn a look. You log it, you watch it, and you tell yourself the assay will clear the lot tomorrow, if the lab can squeeze you in. Here's the harder story hiding under the chart tape. pH isn't just a corrosion guardrail. It decides which oxides form, where they form, and how stable they are. Nickel alloys in steam generators, stainless in piping, fuel cladding, each has a comfort zone. Stay buffered, and the crud that does form tends to be tight, adherent, predictable. Drift and you get flake, spall, transport, spall heads to hot places. It rides the flow into the core, plates out where flux is highest, and starts shadowing neutrons. Now you've got a two-front war. Chemistry is tilting materials, and transporting crud is tilting physics. Engineers have tricks. Zinc injection can tweak oxide structure. Hydrogen control can manage radiolysis products. You can tune boron curves and manipulate letdown cleanup. But all those moves assume the foundation buffer, LiOH from Li-7, isn't sneaking in an extra neutron handbrake and a tritium tap. If it is, your fixes fight each other. Solve pH and raise dose. Lower dose and invite stress corrosion somewhere else. On a pier with time and lab slips, you can sort cause from effect. At depth on patrol, you can't. Get this, hydrogen pickup isn't just a word on a slide. Cladding sees hydrogen as a guest that overstays. Too much, and it changes how the metal deforms under stress. Tritium makes monitoring jumpy not because it's catastrophic, but because it turns your confidence into a question. Confidence runs a boat. If the EOOW believes the models, he'll stretch a little to protect the mission. If the models keep losing to the meters, he'll tighten. But there was one problem, the captain says in a debrief, keeping his voice flat so it doesn't sound like anger. We didn't know the number that mattered when we sailed. Sure, labs aren't villains, they're bottlenecks. True isotope assays, TIMS, MC-ICP-MS, aren't finger-stick tests. Their precision work with cues, calibrations, and lately, export control paperwork on replacement parts. A naval drum gets in line behind a commercial run with penalties. The calendar makes chemistry a gamble. Assay delays twist procedures. You write a temporary deviation that lets you blend. You promise to keep pH in the slot and watch tritium like a hawk. You insert extra samples into a schedule already tight with maintenance. It feels like diligence. It is diligence. It's also turning certainty into statistics. Each blend is a new roll of the dice on an isotope fraction you can't measure at sea. Meanwhile, the XO is thinking ahead of the plant. What does a creeping neutron penalty mean for Rodworth later in the patrol? What does a slightly higher dose rate mean for watch rotations and cumulative totals? Do we bank power early to protect materials margins? Or do we hold the line and spend chemistry to save schedule? None of these questions should hinge on whether a certificate used typical, where it should have said measured. Here's the part that keeps chiefs awake. A submarine reactor runs fine until it doesn't. The alarms you heard in the cold open weren't theatrics. If pH control slips while tritium creep says your Li-6 fraction is higher than planned, you start stacking small conservatisms. One day it's a quiet derate to give crud a chance to settle. Another day it's a surprise scram, because a set point you never used to nudge is now living on a hair trigger. That's not fear. That's a system telling you it wants the purity it was designed around. So yes, this is chemistry. It's also command. The smallest speck on a drum decides whether captain writes press or surface. And on boats where minutes matter, that gram isn't pedantry. It's the difference between riding the numbers and trusting them.